put us in equal weight cameras. Hello! Let us know if you can hear us. You should be able to hear some random snares every once in a while. And Jack.
Snare, snare. Snare, snare, snare.
I guess for the VOD, hi. This is a sound design stream specifically about the sample pack that's coming out Thursday, October 1st, 2020, for our Patreon. And we don't want to get too much into it, so just skip ahead till it looks like we're doing stuff. But we're gonna wait a few bits and see. Make sure everybody can get in, and then I want it to be done before the hour's up so that I can go run off and watch the presidential debates. So it's going to be...
Rapid fire.
Yeah, jam-packed. What's up, Sherwood? You got Eric in the comments as well.
I'm not going to be looking at the comments, so if you just want to relay that stuff to me.
Yep.
I got way too many screens up already.
Let me move this over, and then move this over here. Thanks for the announcement, Yakov. Yep, good call. I will say we're live now in there as well on the Discord. Yeah, everyone. This time I won't double post the picture because I know the widget's gonna pop up. Boom, did it. Great. This goes over here. Sweet. Got a couple people logging in. I know there's like some delay as well on the... Okay, there we go. Yeah, because I don't understand the YouTube analytics yet. It says like 4 concurrent viewers, but then it also says 8 people currently watching. I was like, what's the truth?
Let's just make some menu noises for a while.
Actually, Eric, can you throw up some Twitter Insta stuff? I'm sure you already are doing that, but just in case. What up, Serpentize? Luminous Music, hey, Grim Reaper. Eventually I'm going to get to the point where I know everybody's different usernames over several accounts. I'm not there.
Switching to Discord and everything and getting off Facebook, that's been like the most difficult thing to remember is everyone's usernames.
Yeah.
But like pre-Facebook, everyone had usernames all the time and I never had a problem with it, so... You know, get used to it again. It reminds me of AIM.
Yeah.
Using Discord.
That's a good thing.
Oh.
Yeah, those were the days, man.
Granted, I was an MSN Messenger guy and then a Trillion guy. Yeah. Us Americans.
MSN was more Europeans.
Mm-hmm. Wait, what? I thought MSN was more Americans.
No.
What?
Yeah. I pretty much only used MSN to talk to my European friends.
Really?
Back then, yeah.
What?
Yeah. AIM was like the most popular messaging app, and I don't know why, I was on the Wikipedia for AIM the other night. And it was the most popular messaging app in the United States from like 99 until like 2010.
Jeez.
Whenever everyone stopped using it because Facebook became
we all went to Skype for
thing.
a while though too. I feel like in college.
I never used Skype. Yeah,
Serpentize just said, reminds me of playing Unreal Tournament and being on Ventrilo. And I was just like, my heart! Alright, we got a good amount of people in here now, so let me just get my notes up.
Cool.
So, welcome everybody. I'm Andrew. That's Jack. We got Eric in the chat. All the Ternions are here. And we are doing a stream specifically about sound design, and then even more specifically about how Jack created our upcoming snare sample pack that's going out to the patrons on October 1st. And why we wanted to do this is because the techniques he's using are definitely going to be very different than maybe what you've done before, of what you've heard before. They're like a blend of classic style, but also using it in new ways. And, it's just kind of cool to see it also being done on hardware too. So, that'll be kind of interesting. And then I'm going to kind of guide us through, or I'm going to like be the host, and Jack is going to really guide us through the process. Feel free to shoot questions in the chat. Eric and I are watching, and I'll try to interrupt Jack to, like, if we get lost, if there's a big question or something, to explain something.
I tend to go down the rabbit hole.
It's just, it can go extremely deep, so we'll try to keep it so you only have to like write down and look up a few terms after the stream.
Right.
But what I wanted to start with was, we were talking about this before we went live, but could you point to anything that was like the inspiration for this pack? Was there like a YouTube video or a tutorial, or like what kind of got you on this idea?
Yeah. I mean, I've been using FM synthesis to make percussion sounds for quite a while now, and I think it's pretty common. Just, if you search on YouTube, a lot of people are doing it. I'm pretty sure like Virtual Riot, Mr. Bill did like an operator video showing how to make percussion in operator, and I think Virtual Riot does it in like Serum or something, and it's been all over the place. And also I know too, just from reading and like knowing history about it, like a lot of old drum machines used FM synthesis. I think I was saying before, well, you just sent that wiki over, but I think the 808 used it. So yeah, and I happen to be getting this this digatone here. Which way is it?
That way.
Yeah. And we had a sample pack coming up, and I was like, oh, I got to make this thing. What am I going to make? And the thought was, I hate making drums. It's like the hardest out of all the samples to make, just because of the way the processing's done and everything. Drums are the most tedious, and they take the longest, and they take the most like handcrafting. So I decided to do that, and then I had the synth coming, and I don't know, it just
Stars
two and two
aligned.
went together. Yep.
Yeah, and I think Luminous is just saying AU5 did a video on percussion and operator.
That's the other guy, yeah.
And I think that's what's going to be interesting for a lot of you guys who have seen maybe some of these tricks in operator specifically, and some of the different strategies that come out of the hardware, and then some of the hurdles as well. Like, we're going to talk about routing later, But, okay, so talking about the specifics a little bit, what is the signal flow from, like, what creates the original sound, where does it go, and then, like, how does it kind of end up, just as, like, an overview of where we're headed?
So on the like super zoomed out level, everything starts on the digatone here, which is an FM synthesizer, as I was saying. It starts literally as simple as a sine wave. Do some synthesis here, create kind of a worthwhile sound, that just sounds good enough. Do the best. The concept for me is on each box, I get it sounding as good as I can in that box. And then once I've reached the limits of that box, I move to the next box. And so then I come over here to the Digitact with the samples that I created off of the digatone. I bounce them all to wave, put them in a folder, and ship them over to the memory card on this thing. And this is a sampler. And with this sampler, it's really easy to do resampling, which, if anyone doesn't know, is like when you load a sample on, you put on some effects, some processing, change some of the envelopes, whatever. Then you open up an audio recorder inside of this, you record that sample, then you bring it back in and put it through that effects chain again. And I'll do that, you can kind of see here, it's a little blurry, but I'll do that a handful of times. So anytime you see these longer file names here, that's when it was just an original sample coming from the digatone. And then any of these shorter ones, that's how many times I iterated the process. So how many times I ran it through that resampling loop. And here you can hear this one.
So those are all the different resample versions?
Yep.
Okay.
Each next sound that you hear is the next layer of the resampling.
And it's not the same as just layering. So just to cement the idea, it's not like we're taking a bunch of snares and blending them, I guess. It's like one snare, mess with it with effects, print it, make it a sample, and then that print gets messed with effects and again and again. It's not just like, and then
Exactly.
Foley, and then more Foley, and then another snare, It's different.
Right. Yeah, and there is some layering. Like sometimes I set it up so that I can have two sounds and I can filter one and add it as a layer and then resample that through. And I can show that later, but it's just you keep running it through this effects chain. And if you were to do it in a DAW, like you could record down to audio and do all this in like FL or Ableton. And then just keep running it through a chain. Or you could just literally, I think what a lot of people do is they literally just have these super long effects chains with like hundreds of plugins on them. Not hundreds, but dozens, you know what I mean? I've seen in the Discord, like in Mr. Bill's Discord just the other day, someone was showing their like effects chain and it was like 20 plugins long. It's like distortion, filter, distortion, filter, distortion, filter, over and over again. I'm doing the same thing essentially here, but because you print it into audio every time and it becomes a sample every time, you get artifacts, which is like a really key part of adding texture to things. Because when you have a sample and it's a wave, like say you put distortion, particularly like on this you have bit reduction, which is a kind of distortion. And when you put that onto a sample and then you resample it and you pitch it, say you pitch it down, you change the character of like the top end of the audio spectrum.
Like the bit reduction that you did also gets shifted.
It gets shifted down.
Yeah.
So you had this like, here's a sample. I'll do it really extreme. It's gonna sound bad. But you hear that fuzz? When you pitch that fuzz down, instead of being it becomes a little more like It's basically the way that I think of it in my head. And that's one thing too, maybe I'll trip up on this stream, is I have an internal language for all this stuff and a way of thinking about it. And sometimes when I say it out loud, it's like, oh, that doesn't sound right. But yeah, a big part of this process for me is creating texture and pitching stuff. I'll pitch a snare all the way up, put a lot of distortion on it, so it's like way up here. Get that distortion. Then when I resample it and pitch it down, the length goes back to the time or length where I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But then that distortion gets pitched down like 2 octaves. And the other thing about bit reduction and like the way that the sampler works is there's like at the top end of the frequency spectrum, if you're looking in your EQ, around 20 hertz, which is beyond where most EQs are going to show you. There's going to be a cutoff on this thing because the sample rate, or is it the sample rate or the bit depth? It's the sample rate. I think it's like 22.1.
Sure.
So if you add all this distortion, there's like a sharp cliff, and when you pitch it down, that cliff gets moved down in the EQ. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone who's listening.
Well, it's actually kind of like, not to stop just for a second, Serpendize was saying, Whittler talked about how pitching drums creates artifacts in the top range, and how do you deal with that? Are you saying that you then use that error to create something interesting?
I want the error. That's kind of like my whole process is, there's 2 ideas. One is, how do I use every tool that I'm using in the way that it wasn't meant to be used? Because I find oftentimes, like with Serum, for instance, everyone's like, oh, Serum has a sound. It sounds metallic or whatever. And I hear that, and my oppositional defiance disorder or whatever I was diagnosed with when I was 8 tells me like, oh, fuck you. I don't want to. Sorry, I don't know if I should swear, but
Man.
I don't want. I want to use Serum, but not sound like Serum. How do I make an analog warm sound in Serum and not a bright digital sound? You know, so that's always my thought process: is use the thing in the way that it's not supposed to be used. And then the other thing is kind of like another breaking the rules thing, where it's like, yeah, they would say like, don't put your reverb before your compressor, or like make sure you high pass out these low frequencies that are bad, and all these rules and stuff. And I just look at those rules and I say, okay, how do I break those in a way that sounds good? So that's kind of what I'm doing with like the bit reduction thing. Like, yeah, there's artifacts, and bit reduction is like by definition an artifact. This sound, you know, would have been the undesirable effect of like early samplers not having enough computational power to handle reproducing a piece of audio very well. But yeah, using stuff like that to add texture and graininess, and
That's the idea.
right.
Well, let's go into just the process then, and I'm sure a bunch more questions will get generated as we go. So what Jack's going to do is essentially start from scratch. He's going to start with a bass sound on the digitone.
Digatone.
Digatone. And then just go through the whole process for a bit, so you can see exactly kind of what could happen, you know, with the variations. And I'll stop him every once in a while, but keep pushing your questions through because we're watching. So whenever you're ready, go for it. Don't forget to flip your cam.
Yep. Make sure the focus is all.
That's actually not bad.
I think I can get it better though. There we go.
Crisp.
Nailed it this time. Didn't think of that when we were testing. It's gonna look like crap when I flip it back to my own face, but whatever.
Whatever.
Okay, so I'll try to narrate as I'm going on here, but I might get lost in trying to make it sound good. The more I narrate, the worse it's gonna sound. So it's a balance. So basically, every sound that I start with just starts very simple sine wave. That's how FM synthesis usually works. And kind of the first thing I do in the process is go right to the volume envelope and set this somewhat short.
Now, I was actually going to already stop you because I did take up a picture for this. So because it's pretty important, I feel like I'm going to pull this picture up so you guys can see it on stream. Jack can't see it, but just in case you don't know, the envelope of any sound makes up this attack, decay, sustain, release. And by controlling this volume of a sound over time, which is what an envelope is, you can kind of conform any sound and make it translate to the same way a snare drum would be, you know? So a snare drum's like, pop, you know? So you can use these controls, even if your sound is crazy and super long and noisy, to like bend it to your will. So that's a lot of what Jack's going to be doing. So when he says envelope, that's what he's up to.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, like new producers and even intermediate level producers, just completely overlook the importance of like your envelope shape. Like I know that for a long time, I didn't even mess with volume envelopes on any of the synths I was making, or mess with velocity in the piano roll and stuff, you know? Like I think it's an overlooked but very important part of synthesis. And that's kind of why the first thing that I do is just set this like, oh, what does a snare sound like? You know, is it long? No, snares don't sound like that. They sound, they're short like this. So that's the first thing I do. Then I try to get the pitch in the right range. You know, this is too high pitched. That's more of a kick down there, or a low tom. This could be a lower snare. I like in this kind of range though. This area. And then I start getting into the FM stuff. And in the most basic sense, the way FM works is you have an oscillator like a sine wave like this, and then you have other oscillators that modulate the pitch of that, essentially. but they do it really fast. So there's no good way to demonstrate it on this, but this is the sound of, on the digatone it would be oscillator C is this sine wave, or operator C. They're interchangeable basically, but in FM you want to call them operators. Operator C is being modulated by operator A here. You get that kind of Sega Genesis sound. The Genesis had a FM chip in it. That's why all the Genesis music sounded, you know, all plucky and plinky like that. Anyways, so we're modulating that, and when I'm making a snare, the way that I think is like a snare has 3 parts to it. And so when you hit a snare drum, you've got the drumstick hitting the top layer of skin, right? And then you have this, that's one sound. And then you have the sound of the air inside of the drum in that resonant body oscillating back and forth. And that generates, you know, this, the tone. And then you have the beads on the bottom, or the snare, the thing that makes it a snare. Those rattle and vibrate against the bottom skin, and they create what's basically white noise. It's not white noise, but it's noise. So 3 parts. And replicating that in FM, here in this particular algorithm, which is the one that I used frequently, we have operator A modulating operator C, and it goes to output X. And then you have 2 operator Bs modulating each other that go out to output Y. Oops, sorry. Wrong algorithm. Same kind of thing, but in algorithm 2, the B has a feedback circuit in it. So what I do is I use A modulating C, the sound that I was demonstrating earlier.
And A is like your fundamental, right?
C is the fundamental.
C is the fundamental.
It's weird on this.
Okay.
C is like the sine wave here.
Okay.
A is the modulator.
Okay.
That's modulating C, and we make that short. Because what that simulates is kind of the sound of the drumstick hitting the skin.
Yeah.
With, right?
And then that initial C is like the resonant body, right?
Yep. And then we use the B circuit with the feedback to get the noise. And so I'll switch it over to the Y output so you're only hearing the Bs. And you have to turn the modulation up. And there it's just kind of tonal, but if you turn the feedback up,
Hey.
start to get this kind of white noise thing, almost. And feedback just means that B is modulating itself. So it's modulating itself, and then it's modulating, B1 is modulating itself, and then it's modulating B2, and that's going to output Y. For some reason, they designed this thing where there's 2 B operators. It just leads to some interesting like combinations of modulation. We get that kind of white noise thing going. And then go and play with the envelope shape. Kind of like it to ring out a little bit. And then we go back to the XY, the blend here, and we can blend between this sound and the noise.
I really love how it does sound like I can see a real thing vibrating, like those snares.
Right. So that's really the most basic way to start, and that, you know, I could just stop there and start resampling, to be honest, because what matters more is the processing. But what I'll do is I'll get to a sound like that, and I'll start adding different character to it by changing certain things. So you can change the ratio or the pitch of each of the operators and get some weird, interesting tones like that. Changing A will just change the sound of the click. that sounds kind of neat.
FM's really cool because you
Right.
just don't know what you're gonna get until you turn
Yeah,
it on.
it's really random, and that's kind of a big part of it for me is the happy accidents. You can change the waveforms a little bit, do some detuning. And then you have these LFOs over here. You got 2 of them, and you can use them kind of like envelopes. You can set this wave to exponential shape, and then you can go over here and set the mode to re-trigger every time you hit a note. Here's your multiplier for the time, and then you can set that to the destination of, say, the of the mix between the two, between the noise and the resonant body, I guess you would call it. You turn the depth up here, and then play with the speed, and it gives you more of a click. Actually, we want to go to one-shot mode. Make sure we're in the right place there. And then we can take the X, Y, the mix all the way back down to 0. Do stuff like that, right?
Sick.
Then you can add, you know, distortion. You got reverb over here. That's a lot of reverb. Delay. Turn the reverb down a little bit, maybe.
Now, I'll pause you for a second. So, in my mind, when I'm doing like right now we're making the first chunk that'll later get messed up. I wouldn't think to add like reverbs and delays because I feel like I don't want my sound to be super long and stuff.
You kind of do, though.
Okay, so what do you do with those kind of longer sounds?
The reason why I like to have it is because it's basically like an artifact. It's, you know, it's a thing that you wouldn't want. Like, you would think you wouldn't want it. So my thought right away is, okay, I actually do want that.
Sure.
So again, it's just like me being kind of like defiant towards authority, you know. But it's like with the reverb, you know, you think like, oh, then the snare sample's going to be too loud. But then what you do is when you come over to the sampler here, you just set the volume envelope to be shorter.
Sure.
So you cut that reverb out, but it gives you the reverb on the first chunk of sound. And it changes the character, and it adds a little bit of noise underneath, so you're adding a little bit of texture. And you can play with the EQ, and you can kind of decide where you want that texture to be in the frequency range. And you can play with this, the dampening, and decide like if you want the high frequencies to go way faster than the low frequencies do, kind of thing.
Sure.
And same thing with the delay. If you set the delay time really short and the feedback's somewhat up, you can get this kind of sound. It'll, you know, feedback. This kind of thing, though. You record that, you get it into the sampler, then you start pitching it around. That's going to change the speed at which that's going. Because this doesn't do, like, granular pitching. The time and the pitch are tied to each other. So as you pitch up, the sample gets shorter, and as you pitch down, the sample gets longer, right? Like on the old tape recorder when you were a kid and you slowed down your voice, and it goes way longer, you know?
Okay.
So yeah, I want to add that kind of stuff.
Sick.
And basically, after a period of time of messing around with all this whatever, and I won't do it live here because it really does take a while to fine-tune everything, you'll come up with a sound like this.
And that's all just operators and effects.
Yep. Much more of a snare, right? And then, so now I've got, like, this is the sound that I want. This is like, okay, I've kind of maxed out. I've got everything in the pocket. I've got every setting where I want it. What's next? I could just record this one time and then bring it over here and start messing with it. But I want a lot of variations. And so what I do is I lay down a note on each quarter or on each eighth note, depending on what BPM I have set it at. And then it's going to play every couple seconds. Or not a couple seconds, every couple milliseconds. And then I'm going to go through and I'm just going to start randomly changing parameters. Etc. And I'll do that for about 20 minutes of recording.
And you record it into your DAW?
I should say I record this into the DAW.
Okay.
Yep. And I prefer to use FL Studio because it has Edison, which I think is one of the best audio editing tools out there because it has some auto slicing stuff that I like a lot. Mm-hmm. But I'll record a 20-minute long session. So it's 20 minutes of me noodling and changing values on this and like really just totally messing it up, and it'll totally become something else, you know, by the end of it. We're getting sounds like this, you know, we're adding the reverb in too, the delay, changing this, whatever. You're going to get a lot of variation.
And you end up getting around like 700 maybe after 20 minutes?
I think the last one I did, I got 2,000.
2,000 snare samples.
Yeah. So, and a lot of those are going to end up sounding pretty much the same. Mm-hmm. But essentially what I do is using Edison, you can take all of that audio file, you hit one button you can either do auto slicing, you hit medium auto slicing and it tries to find the transients, and that usually works pretty well. But I've got this set to 140 and I know that one's happening on every eighth or quarter note or whatever. And then in Edison, you can just slice on the grid. So it just automatically slices all the grid points. Then there's a export for common use button, and it exports 2,000 different wave files, and you have like a whole sample pack essentially of all these sounds. And then what I do is I use this program that Mr. Bill actually did a YouTube video about called Resonic Player by Liqube, Liqube, Resonic Player. It's really good. It's like just a audio file player thing. And you can load it up. I load up the folder with the 2,000 samples, hit the down arrow key until I hear a snare that I like, take it, paste it into a folder of selects, I call it, the snares that I've selected, the best ones. And then after going through 2,000 samples, I'll probably have like 100 of them that I thought were good enough to keep. So that's kind of the process from Digatone to recording to the careful selection of which ones I like.
Yeah, I was going to recap there for a second. So the first thing you do is you take the Digitone FM synth and you make an FM snare, and in your mind you're trying to push the sound as far as you can or want to go, so you get like a solid starting point. Then you set up your recorder and have it play on the drum sequencer, and then you just go crazy on the knobs for a certain amount of time. Then you either, by hand or through batch processing, have a program that slices up automatically all those snare hits and dumps them out into individual hits for curation. And then now the step we're on is you go through that big selection where they mostly sound the same or are unusable and pick your favorites, right?
Right.
And now we're about to head to the next step.
Yep. Then I take that folder of my favorites and I put it over here into the Digitact, the sampler. You just load it through USB. There's a memory card inside. And then you can see, I'll show you. Go to an empty sample slot here, hit load. I have this folder called FM Marching Snare Resamps, which is the folder that I made a couple days ago to make the sample pack. And then in here you can see all of the selects that I had.
How many did you end up with? Like 40?
There's like 60 in this folder, I think. There was like 100 from a different one in a different folder.
Okay.
And you can just audition them by hitting yes and then hitting the key that you're on. And this is all without any processing. This is just what came from the Digatone.
Sick.
Just purely out of FM synthesis.
Did you normalize them in Edison?
Yes. They also normalize when you put them onto this. I'm pretty sure.
Sure. That makes sense.
This thing makes everything so easy. Like every time you resample, it normalizes for you. It's amazing. But anyways, here's this list. I'll go through and I'll find one that I like. That's kind of nice. That should be an easy one. And this is where I would say a lot of the character comes through the processing. And where the resampling starts. And there's kind of this philosophy that right now in producing electronic music that it doesn't matter what sound you start with, you can turn any sound into anything else that you want. And I think people think about it a lot with bass sounds where they're trying to make crazy like tear out, bro step, rhythm basses or whatever. Mm-hmm. They'll start with they'll make basses out of snares, those guys like Virtual Riot or like Ulysses or any of those guys. And for me, I was like, I'm going to make snares out of whatever sound I want, except I'm starting with what's pretty much sounds like a snare, but it's still not where I would want it to be. But it's the processing that matters, and that's the idea here, is that the processing and the resampling is going to shape and mold it and push it into that pocket of where I want it to be. So first thing I do is I load one up, and I just start playing with the pitch. I'm probably going to want to land around here. I think this sounds good. That's the original. We're just up 4 semitones. And even just pitching makes such a huge difference. Mm-hmm. We're going to want to land there, but that doesn't mean that's where I want to put it at the first step of the resampling. Because I want to pitch it around continually. Sometimes I'll pitch it way up, then pitch it down again, and, like I was saying before, continue to bake it through this process. So, with this, let's try going up like an octave above where we want it to land, quote, by the end of the chant. So it's a little too high. We wouldn't want to use that, but we're going to make this interesting on its own. So add some bit reduction. We're going to take our filter and set it to high pass.
Now this is a technique that you've been on about to us for a bit, but you use a resonance bump to help create more fundamental or move the fundamental to where you want it.
Because if you listen to it right now, the fundamental's kind of, it's like down here. You create this high resonance peak, and then you can sweep it. And you can kind of hear, even there, you can hear bass, a little bit of bass tone. But I want to change where the fundamental is, so I'm going to move it up here. Like that. I like that. I'm going to turn the resonance down, though, because I was just doing that to hear it. Kind of get it in the right pocket where I like it. You can play with the envelope a little bit, too. Doesn't always sound good, though.
That sounds like a pitch envelope. Or is that a filter envelope?
It's a filter envelope. It sounds like a pitch envelope because we're creating the fundamental using it. I don't like how that sounds, though, so I'm just going to leave it off. Then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add... Oh, I already had the overdrive on, so... Here's what it would have sounded like without it.
Yeah.
Overdrive's, a softer distortion than the bit reduction. We got a little bit of reverb on it. Let's add more. Let's add some delay. I've got this set really short, too.
So you've got delay time parameter, and then it's an EQ in the bottom rectangle there, and it looks like it's got its high pass and low pass just already set, and you can increase the width. Yeah, that's sick. It's so practical. Wow.
The rubber band sound.
That's so cool.
And that's just created by having a really short echo. Sometimes too, if you're recording, you can play with this and record all those little pitch arounds and stuff. I'm going to want this to be really high though, because I'm going to pitch this sample down, remember, from before. We're going to pitch it down an octave. So we want this to be high so that it doesn't sound like this afterwards. Right, so we'll do that. And then one last, like, really major step, I think, is that I use audio rate modulation to create texture and interest. So audio rate modulation is just you have an LFO and it goes really fast. So we'll put it on the bit reduction, which is that distortion that we're hearing. And here you can hear it slowly. Right, we'll set the mode to trigger so it re-triggers the same way every time.
And you have turned the LFO on what? You assigned the LFO to what?
The bit reduction.
So the
distortion.
Like the distortion.
Yep.
Dry wetness or amount, I guess?
Amount, yeah, there's no dry wet on this. Yeah.
Okay.
So we can come back to the main page and turn it all the way down. So it's going from 0 to whatever value we set with the depth here. And I turn on the BPM amount here, you can't read that, but it's a multiplier and you can set it to 2000. So it's 2000 times 36 right now, which is whatever, speed, really fast, right? So we're going from 0 to max, like several thousand times per second.
Yeah.
It's like doing more FM essentially, but instead of modulating pitch, which is what FM is, you're modulating other parameters.
Ha! That sounded like KK Slide. No, it sounded like Mutomo.
And then what's interesting here is that you can, first let's set it to a square. I found that for some reason when you use square audio rate, it sounds really like organic in a way. I don't know how to explain it. I'll show you though. And then you can take this one that I'm turning now, just basically says we're going to make the LFO stop working after a certain amount of time. So you just get it on the hit of the sound. See, there's without. It's just adding like a kind of fluttery, some textural interest to the transient. Right? And that cool. That's good. Do we have the compressor on? No. Compress it a little bit, whatever. It's on this thing, it's hard to mess with the compressor because it really does a lot to the levels, and when you resample it doesn't always sound good. Anyways, we've gotten it to kind of an interesting point here. And this is where the resampling starts. So now I go into this audio recorder mode. I delete the sample that's held in the buffer. And now I can hit yes to arm. I hit the note. It plays the sample. It records into this. Now I have an audio sample. I can preview it. That's what we got. It bounces it down to mono is one thing. That is like a limitation that I've, actually come to enjoy. But you do have to work around it. And it normalizes it for you also. And then you just hit yes. It asks you to name it. I don't name them. I just leave them with the record 0210, whatever. Hit yes. And then reassign it to the key we were just on. And now here's that same sample loaded again, but through that processing chain we just had.
Which is why it's up again, and there's more
Why it's up
delay.
again, because last time we put it up by 16 semitones, and now we've resampled it into the same chain where it's up by 16 semitones. So now it's up a total of 32 semitones, right? But we wanted to come back to this and pitch it down an octave from here to get to that +4. It's a little bit of quick maths,
So you can hear the... Is that the delay from before that's slowing down?
Yep. So if you go really slow, you can hear it.
Yeah.
Sounds more like an echo. I kind of like that. Add some of the bit reduction again. Play with the fundamental. And then now at this point I'm like, oh yeah, that metallic sound is cool, but I kind of want to get rid of it. It's a bit much. So I could either turn this decay time down. Oh, I should turn the delay off. That was still on. Gives us a little less. Let's turn the reverb off too.
And now you
back
can
of
tell
more
that
of a
the
clean
original
sound.
Reverb is mono now.
Yes, yep. And then here we are with this sound. The bit reduction is still doing the modulation it was doing before, but now it's kind of layered on top of what was happening in the first resample. So we're getting like a stacked effect. And then what I'll do is I'll just kind of play around with these parameters again to get it to another place where I like. A little bit of reverb. And one thing that I did a lot, actually, it was I took a sound like this, and I'm like, okay, I want to add like a layer to this, right? So maybe I just want to affect the transient on its own, and I want to affect the tail on its own. So what I'm going to do is turn this into just the transient. Take the reverb off. Now we're just hearing the start of the sound. What we can do is we hit track 1, copy. I copy this sound, I go to track 2, I paste it. So we have it here as well. Bring the attack up. So we're not getting the transient anymore. We're just getting the tail. And now with just the tail, I can say, oh, maybe I don't want the bass. Or maybe I want to get rid of the metallic sound. And I can resample this even. Yes, yes. Assign that here. Change the pitch back to normal. Right, so I can kind of just affect the tail and do the resampling on the tail the way that I want it to. And now when I play them both at the same time, we're getting a little closer. This sound, maybe I'll turn it down a little bit, bring the length down, and then I want to pitch it.
Yeah. Oh, show them what you were doing when we were testing too. The like you accidentally play them a little off. You get a
Oh
little
yeah,
plunk.
right. So
That's so sick. You know, it gives it that big feeling.
right, and then what you do is you go delete your old recording out of the buffer, hit yes, and then record it, played the way that you played it. Hit yes, save, etc., etc. Assign it back to that first note that you had. Then clear out the envelope. Actually, let's clear out all of the processing we had. Come all the way down here. Here's the sample we just recreated, right? And now I'll start from scratch again, because this is my new bass sample, or root sample.
That's so cool.
There you go.
That's a nice reverb too.
And then, like, say I like that, hit yes, record, boom, record it, put it back on the note. It's that quick. Oh, I like that. I'm going to do it again. Hit yes, record, play, yes. put it back.
It's
And
interesting.
each time I'm
Oh, go ahead.
doing that, I'm adding a little bit of distortion and a little bit of, not filtering in this case, but a little bit of reverb, a little bit of distortion, and then I'm taking it out with that amplitude envelope.
So even though you were just simply like playing, resampling, it's like because it goes back through the chain without resetting it, you're stacking that original processing.
Exactly, yeah.
What was the other thing I was going to say that I was so hyped about? I'll think of it later.
Yeah, so then what I'll get essentially is like, you can see, now earlier when I said, I get all these iterations, here you can see this longer file name. I started with this sound. There's one iteration of resampling, 2 iterations, 3 iterations. Then I took in this Foley sound and layered it. We got to this, then to this, then to this, then to this. We just continue changing it like that. So that's like 10 iterations. And each of these, honestly, well, some of these, this one's good, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good. I'll take all of those. Well, basically what I'll do is I'll do this resampling process for almost every snare sample that I got off of the Digatone. So I'll do that thing that I just showed you on this box like 70 times or something. And what I do is I set this timer on my phone. This is like the key to doing tedious work, I think. I'll show it. I set these timers here where, yeah. I work for 25 minutes, I take a break for 5 minutes. I work for 25, take a break. And during that 25 minutes, I can usually load up a root sound, like one of the original samples, iterate it through resampling, and bounce that all the way. I can do that about 3 times. So I create like probably 5 or 6 good snare sounds that I like every 30 minutes. And then I get this thing loaded up, like there's 214 recordings loaded onto this thing, which means that's probably 214 different stages of resampling I've had. Then what I do is, well, maybe we should recap everything I just said.
Here's the thing. So
before going to the next stage.
I've been writing a lot of this stuff down, and we're getting close on time. And Eric was reminding me too. We should leave some room for questions. So let me try to recap. And then, but one quick question: what was that timer app called?
It's called Seconds Pro. It's like $3. There's Seconds, which is the free version. I think you can't set custom timers in it or something though, so you want to buy the $3 one. It's called Seconds Pro.
Nice. Okay. So while I'm trying to recap to see if I remember, if you guys could think of any questions you have, go ahead and send them, and then we will try to answer them, and then with the rest of our time, either go through that or just sort of finish out some of the polish parts. But, okay. So, step 1, create your root sound using the Digatone FM synth, with the idea that you're going to push it as far as you can or as far as you want, using like all the knobs and parameters to make one cool, like, great, I'm ready to use this and mangle it sound. Then use some sort of program to make sure it's hitting over and over again, and push it into a recorder. And while it's recording, that's when you start going nuts, playing with different parameters, mangling it that way, stuff like that, maybe for a timer amount of time. Stop that. Then you've got a big chunk of like 10 minutes of snares. Either what we used to do is we used to handcraft it before we knew Edison could do batch stuff. So we just listen through and click through and pick our favorites, so you could do that, or batch cut it into a bunch of different samples into a folder, and then, listen through those and find the ones that are good. Drag those to a new folder called like selected, And this is where the second hardware piece comes in, where you transfer those to the Digitact.
Yep.
Digitact.
Yep.
And then that is a sampler. So now you're kind of doing the process of resampling. So before we were doing operators into operators, now we're doing like mangle sounds into mangle sounds, kind of. So you've got your original sound, and even maybe like Jack was doing, think ahead, be like, yes, it sounds good right now, but I'm going to take it somewhere else and maybe bring it back, like with the pitch technique. And then remember too, it's all about iterative design and happy accidents. So you're just like, oh, that sounds interesting. Save, reload, continue. Oh, that's interesting. Save, reload, continue. Because at that end of that point, you want to end up with new, interesting, cool sample dump to curate from again. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then...
Yeah, and...
Oh, go ahead.
So, to abstract this process, like, you can change certain steps of this to fit your needs. Like, if you're in a DAW, well, maybe you just use operator instead of this hardware synth to do your FM drum sounds. And, you use sampler instead of this sampler synth. Like, you don't have to have hardware to do this stuff. I just like it because it's faster, essentially. For me, at least. There's probably fast ways to do it in the DAW, too. Mm-hmm. And maybe instead of using FM synthesis, you want to use wavetable synthesis to generate what sounds like a snare drum. You can make snare sounds using any kind of synthesis, really. You just have to be smart about it and kind of think about the way that a snare actually works. Say you're doing subtractive. Well, you don't have the FM operators and stuff, but you have white noise and you have saw waves and square waves. So you could take a square wave, put a filter envelope on it, kind of create a hit sound that way, and then you could just filter in some white noise and do a volume envelope on that, etc.
Yeah.
So there's different ways you can do this, different parts of the stage, and with the processing, you could do it in the DAW, you could use different effects, you could all use, the millions of different reverbs and delays and other kinds of VSTs, distortions. You could use stuff that isn't meant to be used a certain way and, like soothe and go to the extreme with it and you get kind of a weird sound.
Yeah. Just before I get to Jaren's question, Funk Mod, and while we're abstracting, the key takeaways philosophically, I guess, that I wrote down while you were working was something Jack, Eric, and I have talked about for a long time is leaning into the problem. So that philosophy of using tools wrong, or like when we were talking about how, I pitched my snare drum down and now there's bad artifacting. Like, how can you use the bad? I feel like the whole beginning of your process was like, use the bad, right?
Right. And a lot of the reason I think about that too is because sometimes to get my drums, like I don't make all my drum sounds because it would be a pain to do this all the time and make my own library and like, it would only be my sounds of my own head. Sometimes to get my drum sounds, I sample out of old tunes, you know what I mean? Like every hip-hop producer's done since the beginning of time. But when you sample a snare out of a drum break, there's going to be reverb and compression on it, and there's going to be all kinds of stuff that you didn't want, and you're like, oh, how do I fix that? Then you have to use the techniques that you would use to fix that to kind of fix things, quote-unquote, in this resampling process. So you'll use an envelope to cut the reverb out of the sample that you had, but then you'll add your own reverb afterwards, But then I keep treating each next iteration of it as a sample, so it's
like you set up a question and then answer it. You set up a problem and then fix it.
Right.
But you're an active participant
Exactly.
in both stages.
It's kind of actually a fun game to play sometimes too, where I'm making a sound and I'm like, I'm going to make this sound as shitty as possible. Like, how do I make this sound as bad as possible? And then bounce it out to a sample. And then I ask myself, how do I save it? Like, how do I get it back to where I wanted from this place that I'm at?
Yeah.
It's like playing the Wikipedia game. You ever play that?
How do I get to...
It's a game. It gives you a random Wikipedia page, and then it tells you, like, you start on penguins in Antarctica, and then you have to get to President of the United States by only clicking the links. It's a lateral thinking, I think, is the common theme.
The other things I wrote was in sound design, it's the processing that matters because that's going to give you a specific end result. And we're kind of running out of time, so I'll just breeze through these. I personally wrote down get fluent in the tools because then you can play and work faster. That's especially true of hardware. And then timers help create that box because, you know, if you're like, I'm going to make 1,000 snares today, how do you make 1,000 snares? Well, you give yourself, you know, timers potentially, or you give yourself some sort of parameters, you know.
Yeah, I never set amount quotas for myself. I set time quotas. So I don't say I have to make 1,000 samples today because that's daunting and scary. I just say I have to work for 8 hours total today. And then whatever I get at the end of that, that's what I get.
So Jaren's question is, I find it really easy to get the noise and fundamental down, but I find it hard to get mid-tone and make it sound convincing. Any tips for that?
I don't see, this is like, I think one of those things where it's, people always think of it technically like this, and I don't. I just like, if I don't have a midtone, I don't even think like, oh, no midtone, I'm going to do this kind of process. I'll just move, maybe I'd move the pitch around a little bit and try to play the snare on a different octave. Or maybe I'd try to add some distortion to get additional harmonics coming in. Or maybe I'd use different waveforms in the FM. Or sometimes I use the reverb, you know, to create more of a body and a midtone. And then when I resample it, I just cut most of that reverb out with the volume envelope. Or you can use the delay and use those short delay times and bandpass the wet signal of the delay. Is something you could do. You could do audio rate modulation on parameters. Like, there's no one single way that I would do it, and that's what I mean. For me, it's really just like a feel thing. Like, I know how these tools work and what they sound like, and I just like.
Well, you're throwing stuff at the wall, right? Until
yeah,
a happy
exactly.
accident fixes your problem.
Yep. A lot of the time, if I'm like, oh, this needs more body or whatever, there's not like a thought in my head like, oh, I'm just going to add this and it's going to work. I usually just go, well, I think this arena of techniques will work. I'm just going to start randomly turning knobs inside of this place. And through the randomization, eventually something comes out that I like. It's never, for me, any part of making music is never conceptualized in my head. I don't have like ideas for songs in my head and then I go create them. It's like, it's entirely a process of randomizing stuff and then cultivating afterwards.
Two more
randomize,
questions.
Randomize, cultivate.
This will be potentially a quick one. Are the effects in the sampler you're using parallel or in series?
They're in series.
Okay.
For the most part.
Well, you said
but again,
there's no dry wet, right? So that would make me think
there's no dry wet, yeah. The delay and the reverb are parallel to each other. But you can feed the delay into the reverb using a setting here. The bit reduction comes before the filter. So you can't put it after the low pass filter. So if you use the low pass filter, you lose the top end of the bit reduction. So there's like little constraints built into this thing. Like you just can't do certain stuff. So you have to work a certain way because of the way that it's built. But again, like it's one of those things where people are like, oh, you have to use parallel processing to make sound a certain way. And then immediately my first thought is, no, you don't. Screw you. I'm going to make it sound a way without using parallel processing. Because I think that's something that people get hung up on. They're like, they watch a YouTube tutorial and the guys on YouTube are like, okay, now set the wavetable to 45% and then set the cutoff of the frequency to 750 hertz and all this shit. And it's like, it doesn't matter the specifics. What matters is the concept of how the tool you're using works. You have to understand why things are happening. Unlike, and not just logically on a thinking level where you can explain it using language, but you have to intuitively understand it and feel it, like in your feel place.
And then OCA2 says, hardware specific question, have you tried this process in Overbridge?
What do you mean by an overbridge? Overbridge is just a way that basically both of these boxes can be used as a VST on the computer. I don't use it because
It would ruin
the
your...
whole point of having this box is to be able to turn 4 knobs at the same time using my fingers. I don't want to click around with a mouse. There's really no advantage to using overbridge other than that, like, you can set up automation lanes and like automate stuff if you're in like song mode essentially.
No.
But I wouldn't do that because I'm not using this to write songs. I'm purely using both of these to generate audio into waves, and then I create samples out of that, and then I load those samples into my DAW. I don't use these to write songs at all. It's just not my workflow.
Alrighty, we're going to wrap it up with that one. Thank you, Jack, and Eric, and everybody who tuned in. This is going to stay up, so if you want to watch this over and over again, or save this somewhere in like your production tips YouTube playlist for one of those days where you're like, I don't know what I want to do, but I want to do something, you know, definitely bookmark this. Hit the subscribe. I got to be a YouTuber now, I forget. So now that we've got the Patreon, I know. We're going to be doing more of these videos, and we often do around 2 hangout streams with some of your potentially favorite artists, and it's got some cool heady topics, so if you're into that sort of thing. Also, check out our Discord. Hey, speaking of cool heady topics with friends, Joe Nice, how's it going? Good to see you.
Oh, what's up, Joe?
Were you going to say something, Jack?
Was I?
I feel like you're stepping up to the plate.
Oh, no, I was just drinking water and then swallowing it and then thinking. I don't know.
But yeah, thank you guys. If you found this interesting also, could you shoot us a tweet, give it a share potentially, and let us know. And if there are any issues, especially technically wise, hit me up so we can fix them in the future. But that'll be it for this time. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Be well. Bye.
Peace.
End stream.